Hey guys, it's me, Dr. Ree, and in this video we're going to be looking at the appendicular muscles, specifically the upper extremity as a whole, and then we're going to kind of deep dive into the different parts of the upper extremity. Now here's my big disclaimer with this video. You do not need to know everything that I am going to show. You don't need to know it all, okay? Don't worry. The way that I made this video, I have a lot of notes from when I was in grad school, and I wrote out origin, insertion, and all these things. They will be on the screen, but you don't need to freak out. In lab, you don't need to know all of these origins, insertions. You need to know the general place where things are found. Now, please refer to your course overview for lecture to see if these are things that you need to know for there. And of course, what I have written here are things of what my textbooks that I learned when I was in grad school and in undergrad gave me. So they might be different than what your textbook does. So at the end of the day, whenever it comes to lecture, please refer to the lecture notes that he gives you for these. But these are helpful ways and drawings that I've done in the past that I think might be helpful for you to visualize what we're looking at when we're looking at muscles. I will be going through these muscles very quickly. There are a lot of muscles. I will be highlighting some important ones, describing some ways of remembering things. But at the end of the day, the more repetition you get, the better you're going to get at remembering what these muscles are. All right, so let's start with just an overview looking at the upper extremity. So in these two images that we see right here, we have, accidentally clicked the wrong thing. They changed this whole thing. Where's my little highlighter? Okay. All right, so in these two images, we see a lot of different muscles. This one is looking at a superficial, so this is the most anterior, the top layer of muscles. This is intermediate, so this is they took off some of the muscles and you could see deep below it. So looking right here at the superficial, this is our pectoralis major. It's not labeled on this image, but that's what we're looking at here. So this is pectoralis major, and then on the top of our shoulder is our deltoid. So a lot of you guys are familiar with that, the deltoid, and then we have our pectoralis major. As we go down from the shoulder in this anterior position, we have our biceps brachii. That's what we think of when we think of like flex your arm, you're flexing your biceps. On the lateral side, we have brachialis, and then deep on the medial side, we have coracobrachialis, which we'll see in the other image better. As we come down into the forearm, we have on the lateral side brachioradialis. It starts on the brachium and then comes down to in the forearm. And then on the medial side, we have pronator teres. These are two that are important to know in the forearm. As we come down towards the wrist, we have flexor carpi radialis. What that does, its name says what it does. It flexes the carpi or the carpals on the radial side. The radial side is the lateral side. So that's going to be helping with flexion as well as radial deviation, or moving the hand towards the lateral side, which would be abduction. Again, a lot of information. We're just kind of looking at these. As we go a little deeper, so this is, I took the pec major off. Underneath the pec major is pec minor. In lab, I'll show you how to palpate the pec minor. It's a common place that's tight in athletes. Here you can see that coracobrachialis that's running down that more medial side underneath the biceps brachii. This has the biceps brachii broken down into its two heads. It's called biceps because it has two different heads. We have a long head that's more lateral and a short head that is more medial. Here you can't see brachialis as well. You can kind of see it right here a little bit, but brachialis will be kind of more on the side. It's cut right here. Here's that brachioradialis coming down again, starting on the brachium and crossing over. And then this is that pronator teres on the medial side, but it's cut. Those are some of those important ones. The flexor digitorum superficialis is one that flexes the digits, so the fingers, and there's two of them, flexor digitorum superficialis and flexor digitorum profundus. We're not going to go deep into the hands in this video, but those were things that you'll see in lecture. This is just one more, a deeper cut of there. So we're seeing a lot of the same things. I'm not going to point everything out. But what I do want to point out is that you can see that digitorum profundus, so that's the deeper cut that's underneath superficialis. And then the other thing is that, so we took the pec minor, so remember pec minor was here. I flipped pec minor, reflected means flipping it up, so you can see that they took the pec minor that was right here and flipped it up. And underneath that, you can see all the way back here. This is if I took a stick and I kind of poked it all the way back. This is subscapularis. This is one of the rotator cuff muscles. So this is a rotator cuff muscle. There are 4 rotator cuff muscles. Subscapularis is one that is often ignored, especially in treatment. It is on the back, behind the scapula. And so right now we're looking at it behind the scapula. So this is the rib cage, and this is actually the scapula back here. And so this is subscapularis. I'll show you kind of how you can palpate that in class. Now we're looking at the back. So now we're looking, those were anterior views. This is looking at the back. So a posterior view. We see a bunch of different muscles here. Right here, this is the trapezius muscle. So this is superficial. Here is latissimus dorsi. So right here, that's latissimus dorsi. There's the deltoid, the back. This is the rear delts that we're seeing here. And we're seeing teres major right here. Underneath teres major is teres minor. Teres minor is another rotator cuff muscle, and we also have infraspinatus. We'll talk about those in a second. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. On the back of the brachium, we have the triceps brachii. And here we can see some of our extensor muscles. So let's focus on the muscles that move the upper extremity. So these are back muscles. So they were possibly covered in the axial. They're technically axial muscles, but because they move the extremity, I chunk them in the appendicular muscle system. And that's what you'll see in a lot of text, that it'll be chunked in there. So this is just a closer view of that image we were just looking at. So again, this is the traps. So this is superficial. And down here we have latissimus dorsi. In this image, we could see that it comes all the way down there. It's a big muscle, the lats are. And here we see, so here's that teres major. And underneath that right there, that's teres minor. So teres minor is another one of our rotator cuff muscles. So now we have 2 rotator cuff muscles we've identified. The subscapularis and teres minor. As we look a little deeper at the back, we can identify a few more of those muscles in the back that move. So kind of just orienting ourselves. Here's the trap. This side is going to be superficial. This side is a little deeper. So here we have our trapezius, our lat. This right here, so if you thought about the scapula, remember we had the infraspinatus fossa, or the inferior fossa. So the spine of the scapula was here, and then in that kind of fossa that we had underneath the spine, that is going to be infraspinatus. So this muscle, infraspinatus, is there. On top of the spine is supraspinatus. So infraspinatus is below the spine, top of the spine is supraspinatus. These 2 are also rotator cuff muscles. So when commonly someone says, I tore my rotator cuff, that's not correct. Well, it is correct, but the more particular thing is, so what muscle did you tear? Did you tear all 4, right? So typically when someone tears the rotator cuff, they actually tore supraspinatus. That's the most common one to have a tear. But we do have supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. The common saying for your rotator cuff muscles is sits, right? So supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, remember it's minor, not major, and subscapularis. The other muscles on here that I just want to point out is the rhomboids. So here we have rhomboid major and rhomboid minor. The rhomboids are going to help with when we do a rowing position, right? And we retract our scapula, bring our scapula together, like when we're rowing. That is what the rhomboids do. We also see that serratus anterior we talked about last time. And then levator scapulae, which we talked about in the last lab. So this is just, again, like I said, all of the words that I have here are just from my old notes. You don't need to write any of it down, but if it helps you with your notes, feel free. But again, this is not what you're required to know. This is just help. This is just extra. So this is just a drawing version of kind of what we're seeing here, just in case you want to have like a more visual. So this is a drawing I did. So we have the trap here, the deltoid, and as we look down, here's that spine of the scapula, supraspinatus above, infraspinatus below, teres minor, and then teres major on top of that. And then there's the biceps. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. I'm not sure if you guys are required in lecture to know the shoulder spaces, so those are there if that's something you need to know, but if it's not, don't worry about it. And we're going to talk more about nerves in the future when we get to peripheral nerve lab, so don't worry too much about that. I'm going to just kind of highlight the muscles that we're going to be looking at lab. So we have trapezius, latissimus dorsi, rhomboid major and minor. We're not going to interchange the two. You just need to call them the rhomboids, and levator scapulae. When we look here, right, we have our deltoid. Here I highlighted those rotator cuff muscles, right, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, subscapularis, and teres minor. Teres major is not a rotator cuff muscle. It is teres minor. We talked a little bit about the pectoral region. The main thing is to think about pec major is here. Underneath that would be pec minor. This is a common lecture idea, and I just wanted to give you guys this because this might be something that you see on your lecture exam, so this is how I always remembered it. So when we look at the intertubercular area, so you can see here that pec major inserts on the lateral lip of the intertubercular groove, whereas the latissimus dorsi up here is on the floor of the intertubercular groove, and then teres major, which is right here, is on the medial lip of the intertubercular groove. A common question is to ask, what is on the floor of the medial or of the intertubercular groove? What is medial on the intertubercular groove, etc. So I always remembered from medial to lateral, and when I make a sandwich, so M to L, it goes pickle, lettuce, tomato. Pectoralis major is lateral. Pectoralis major, medial. No, I was right. These words are wrong. Sorry. I wrote these wrong. This should be lateral to medial. Look at my old notes fixing them. Okay. So from lateral to medial, L comes before M. Pectoralis major, latissimus dorsi, right? Latissimus dorsi is in the floor, and then the tomato. Pickle, lettuce, tomato is how I like my sandwich. So that's just like a little thing. See if he talks about that in lecture. If he doesn't, don't worry about it. The muscles here that we will be looking at lab is pec major and pec minor. We're not going to look at subclavius too much, and we already looked at serratus anterior before. All right, we're going to move down into the brachium. So that's it for shoulder. Looking at the brachium. Now, I like to visualize the compartments of the arm. So remember that the arm is also called the brachium. And I create what I call the Pokeball of anatomy. And you'll see this with the extremities. I do this with all of them. They're like my little cheat sheet study guide when I think about it. So basically, this is if I took a cross section of the arm. And what you would really see is right here, this is the humerus, right? That's the bone within the brachium. And then we will define this as the anterior compartment. So this is the anterior compartment, and this is the posterior compartment. And so looking here in the anterior compartment and posterior compartment, they both have specific functions that are specific to their compartment. So in the anterior compartment of the arm or the brachium, we're going to see that these are going to be our flexors And back here, we're going to have our extensors. Now, specifically in the brachium, we only have one muscle in the posterior compartment. That's our triceps brachii. And we have three muscles in our anterior compartment, and that's our biceps brachii, our brachialis, and our coracobrachialis. So now in this little, if I'm able to remember how to draw my little Pokeball, I can answer action, I can answer who's where, etc. So I do this a lot of the time. I try to sum things up in a smaller kind of chunk. So let's look at that. So right here, right, we have our biceps. So this is the anterior compartment. So the anterior compartment of the brachium has the biceps brachii, the brachialis, and the coracobrachialis, you can't see, it's deep to this. And then the posterior compartment has the triceps brachii. So we have three heads, right? Triceps, three heads. So there's a lateral head, a long head, and a medial head. Medial head, long head, lateral head. And they're going to be doing extension. So here, again, you don't need to know all of this, but this is just like a drawing that I did. I made this a very short brachium. And so here you can see that Pokeball that I have always done. I wrote, so they flex the forearm. Forearm flexion means bringing the forearm towards it. So a lot of people get confused with that. So if something says forearm flexion, that would be the brachium that's doing forearm flexion, because it's bringing you name the action by what limb is going towards what or away from what. So forearm extension. Don't worry about the nerves. We'll get to that when we do the nervous system. That's the main things there. So when looking at it, this is just, again, this is a lot of information. Don't worry too much about it. But we have our biceps brachii, brachialis, and coracobrachialis. Those are the main things to know here. And then the triceps brachii in that posterior compartment. Now let's do our Pokeball for the forearm. So if we are looking here, we can do, we'll make this lateral. We'll make this medial. Remember that the radius is lateral and that the ulna is medial. In that way, we'll make this the anterior compartment. Sorry, I'm so stuffy. And this is the posterior compartment. And just like how we saw in the brachium and the forearm, we still keep similar actions, but we add one more action per group. So in the anterior compartment, it's going to continue to be where we have our flexors, so flexion, as well as pronation. So there are pronator teres is the big one in the anterior compartment that is going to be doing pronation. In the posterior compartment, we have extension and supination. The big muscle doing that in the posterior compartment is the supinator muscle. That's the name of the muscle, is supinator, which is found in the posterior compartment. So those are the main things. We have a lot of muscles in this area. There will be a few that I'm going to kind of highlight, and those are the ones in these compartments that we'll be looking at in lab and that you'll have to identify. So if we look down here, in this anterior compartment, here's that pronator teres. So pronator teres is a big muscle that we see right here. It kind of goes like this. And pronator teres is going to be the main pronator. We also have something called pronator quadratus. That's a little short, smaller, and it's deep in here. Don't worry about that. Pronator teres is the main one I want you to think about. We also have flexor carpi radialis. Radialis meaning it's on the lateral side, so it's right there. And next to that is brachialis, or brachioradialis. Brachioradialis is kind of on this mixture of right in between being in the posterior compartment and the anterior compartment. The other one is our flexor carpi ulnaris, as well as our flexor digitorum superficialis and our flexor digitorum profundus, which is not in this image, but that's another one that's important. I'll just try that one too. Here is a posterior view. So here we see that brachioradialis again. This we have extensor carpi ulnaris. We also have extensor carpi radialis. There's a brevis and a longus. Brevis means small, longus means long, short versus long. That's just kind of how they're named, but they do the same thing. We also have extensor digitorum that extends the digits. And so those are some of the ones that will be important to kind of be able to identify. So if we look at that antebrachium, again, this is a lot of notes. You don't need to know all of this. This is just to be helpful. So here you can see that same pokeball of anatomy. Here I did medial and lateral, so I did a little different. I also included the nerves. You don't need to know that. So pronator teres is an important one. Flexor carpi radialis. Flexor digitorum superficialis. I have these separated by the nerve that innervates them. That's just because I focused on nerves. Don't worry about that. So we're just saying these ones that I just talked about are all in the anterior compartment of the forearm. Some more in the anterior compartment of the forearm that you need to know is flexor digitorum profundus, as well as flexor carpi ulnaris. As you can see, all of them have that flexor name. So that's kind of how I know anterior compartment of forearm. In the posterior compartment, the ones that I want you to focus on, brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis, longus and brevis, they kind of are interchangeable. The supinator, extensor digitorum, and extensor carpi ulnaris. We also have a bunch of these that are working on, like this one is the ring finger, right? The index finger. This is for the thumb, pollicis. Pollux is how we say thumb, so these are both extending the thumb. This is extending, where do we have minimi? Digiti minimi is the pinky. So they kind of, in their names, say what they do, but don't worry too much on that. Now, I'm not going to go in depth with the wrist and hand. There's a lot to look at, but the main thing I want you to see, and you'll talk about this more in lecture, is looking at the interossi muscles. So this is a common thing, is the different interossi muscles. We have palmar interossi and dorsal interossi. Palmar interossi and dorsal interossi. And the way to remember their action is the palmar interossi do adduction, adduction. So pad. The dorsal interossi do abduction, dab. Pad and dab. So those are just actions commonly asked, and that's the way to remember it. So palmar, pad, adduction, dorsal interossi, dab, abduction. Abduction means going away. Adduction means going towards midline. All right, that was a lot of information. Again, a lot of all the words you see, origin, insertion, all of that, don't worry too much about. That's more lecture ideas and focus on what he says that you need to know. But these are just helpful tips.